welcome witnesses from Mitsubishi Motors. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, can you please in turn state your full names and the capacities in which you appear today?
Yes, Tim Hoare, Director of Sales for Mitsubishi Motors Australia Limited.
Thank you.
And Catherine Humphrey-Scott, PR Manager for Mitsubishi Motors Australia Limited.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite Mitsubishi Motors Australia to make an opening statement, whichever of you wants to do that.
Thank you, Senator. Mitsubishi Motors is an Australian-based automotive company. Together with its dealers, Mitsubishi contributes to the employment of over 5,000 staff across Australia. This year is the 40th anniversary of Mitsubishi commencing operations in Australia. In that time, Mitsubishi has consistently increased its commitment to Australian consumers and our dealers. In July this year, Australia was designated as a leader market for Mitsubishi globally, showing Mitsubishi's commitment to Australia moving forward. Our dealers are critical to our success. They range in size from small remote dealers in outback locations to large corporate dealer networks that operate multiple dealerships and are larger than Mitsubishi Australia. We are committed to our dealers as they are to us. Of our small dealers, more than 25% of them have been with us since the commencement of our operations in Australia 40 years ago, and some are multi-generational family-owned businesses. We want our dealers to succeed. When they do well, we do well, and our customers benefit the most. Over the past 40 years, we've created a culture that encourages open communications across multiple channels at all levels of the organisation. These are open to every dealer and their staff. Our dealers are represented by the National Dealer Council, or NDC. The NDC provides an organised voice on behalf of the network of nearly 200 dealers. Mitsubishi and our Dealer Council consult with one another when there are issues of mutual opportunity or concern. Working with the NDC ensures we are well equipped to meet the needs of both consumers and our dealers. Mitsubishi is more than just a business. We support our customers and dealers and the communities in which they operate through our regional offices or national efforts such as our community fleet program. In the past 12 months, our focus has been in the area of disaster preparedness and recovery. We've introduced volunteer days for staff, provided an additional 4 weeks leave for frontline volunteers. Last year, our community fleet program provided more than $1 million in vehicle support to our partner organisations. Mitsubishi was shocked when it learned that Holden was withdrawing from Australia. We share the committee's concern regarding the impacts of this decision on Holden dealers, consumers and the broader community. I've been in the industry in a broad range of roles for more than 25 years, and I've never seen anything similar to the Holden exit. It was sad to see the end of what was once a major Australian brand. Mitsubishi plans to grow its network of dealers. We've added former Holden dealers to our network. We've also directly employed former Holden staff. We look forward to them contributing to our ongoing success in the years to come. A number of our existing dealers were also Holden dealers. We have worked with them to repurpose their showrooms to represent the Mitsubishi brand. Mitsubishi understands that a focus of this hearing is the franchising code and the relationship between dealers and manufacturers. Our franchise agreement provides a strong foundation and shared understanding for Mitsubishi and our dealers' success. At Mitsubishi, ending a franchise agreement is always a last resort. There are no surprises for either side. If the dealer encounters any business challenges, there are policies and additional support available to help them get the business back on track. As we have said, our dealers' success is our success. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of you today. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoare, for your evidence this morning. Can I ask, there are a set of draft principles for the relationship between dealers and OEMs. Can I ask what your position is in relation to that? I think it's partly covered in your submission, but I'm keen to see how you characterise the need or the lack of need for such a set of principles in your relationships or relationships more broadly?
Yes, Senator. Well, we received them on Friday afternoon. We'd not seen them before or had any input into the process. However, we would very much like to see more detail regarding the details of the principles. Our agreements already contain provisions for the buyback of inventory, the timely commercial settlement and dispute resolution. When they are ready for a full consultation with details, we're more than keen to participate in any formal proposal, provide feedback and consultation.
Can I ask in that context if you could take on notice the extent to which, so your dealer agreements seem to cover off on more of the points within those principles, whereas others seem to be more open-ended. And so I'm interested to see in the context of the franchising codes and the amendments to that, which Senator O'Neill is well across, the extent to which things that should be in other agreements, how much the agreements vary and whether they therefore kind of aren't consistent with those draft principles and therefore might also contain unfair contract terms, because it does seem that some of the agreements vary quite radically. So perhaps you might need to take that on notice given you've only just seen them, but I would be interested in any feedback back that Mitsubishi has on that.
Certainly, Senator, we'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Senator O'Neill?
Thank you very much, Chair. And if I can just go to your opening evidence there, Mr. Hoare, thank you for being on board today. I note you're the Director of Sales. Companies have different ways of naming people. Is that the CEO role in your organisation?
No, it's not the CEO role. My remit is the responsibility for sales, the dealer network, and also network development comes under my job function. So I'm best placed within our organisation to answer questions today, Senator.
Thank you very much. And just for the record, who is your CEO?
Sean Westcott.
Okay, thank you very much. I noted in your opening remarks that you indicated that you have 5,000 staff. Could you give me a breakdown of how many dealers there are, how many jobs in those dealerships and how many apprenticeships? And then Mitsubishi Motors Australia, your overarching entity. So could you just break down the numbers for me?
Yes, certainly. So Mitsubishi Australia has 150 direct staff with a number of part-time workers on top of that. And the dealer network has almost 5,000 staff involved in the Mitsubishi brand, be that in sales, service, administration, finance, etc.
Okay, so the 5,000 is actually the dealer network, and Mitsubishi Motors Australia, who you're representing, employ 150 people.
Directly, yes, Senator.
Thank you. If you could take on notice the distribution of, those roles across the country and also the distribution of your dealer network, that would be really, really helpful. Could you give me an idea of how many apprentices are employed by your dealer network? How many in the network?
In terms of dealers, almost 200 dealers.
Thank you. Sorry, you did say that in your evidence. How many apprentices do you think?
I'll take that on notice and come back with an accurate answer for you, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Obviously, apprentices are an important part of our business, having such a large service footprint.
Exactly. And don't forget all the grey nomads who roam the country looking for a Mitsubishi sign when they need to go and get something checked. It's a very important part of the confidence to get out and see parts of a country, including far north Queensland, like the area that Senator McGrath comes from. So I appreciate that distribution network. You made comments about the devastating impact of the Holden withdrawal, which has led to a further extension of this inquiry, because we've seen already very challenging information about delays in warranty claims being properly processed, people getting their car serviced in a timely way as Holden's withdrawn. You also spoke about the fallout for some of your franchisees in the Mitsubishi network who you've tried to assist by putting more Mitsubishis into their showrooms, by the sounds of things. Why is the Holden situation so devastating for Australians, and what risk does it bring into the market? What do we need to be aware of, Mr. Hall?
I think the big issue with the Holden one is obviously it was an iconic brand within Australia and was seen as part of the fabric. So obviously that is why it's had such an impact, because so many people have had some interaction in some way with the brand.
So do you think the only major loss is the sort of nostalgic connection, or is there more of a material loss to the Australian people now that, you know, Holden doesn't have that on-the-ground presence across a network with GM?
Senator, there's certainly a nostalgic impact. It's very personal for a lot of people, understandably so. I'm not across the reasons why Holden departed the market, but obviously I can only refer to our position, where we're a brand that is very important to Mitsubishi globally, in terms of the Australian market being so important. And a lot of our efforts go into building and producing cars that best suit that Australian market. So for us, it's a very unlikely event, just due to the fact that we are so focused in producing those cars, and those cars that you mentioned that allow people to explore Australia and get out to see the best of what our country has to offer.
When relationships go bad, we understand that it's important to be able to go somewhere to resolve them. Are you aware, Mr. Hoare, that in the 2 days before General Motors withdrew from Australia, that Minister Cash directed them to engage in good faith in arbitration?
No, I wasn't, Senator.
So the minister told them to go and have a chat, sort it out. There was no resolution of the matters. Holden proceeded, people took their offers under duress with a deadline of June 30, and we've seen General Motors depart. In that context, there is a very big push from the dealer networks to make arbitration mandatory. That is their request of the government, because it was so spectacularly failed come the end of June. If the government were to make resolution of matters between OEMs such as yourself and car dealer networks mandatory, would Mitsubishi leave Australia?
Senator, Mitsubishi wouldn't leave Australia. As mentioned, we're a leader market. We're particularly important to our parent company. We build cars that are very much designed for Australians and the Australian lifestyle. We're here for the long term.
Right. I really appreciate your frankness in response to that question. I know that you are here. Thank you for your submission. I know that one of the reasons that we wanted to call you was not all business relationships are all smooth, and you've had some particular problems that we've become aware of. So to try and get a sense of what happens in that context, I've got a line of questioning just about the power that operates, because that's one of the things that we've heard. Despite the fact that there's 200 dealers in the network with 5,000 staff, Mitsubishi Australia represents an overseas company that has very much more power than the small entities that are actually on the ground that people see as their Mitsubishi dealer. So can I ask, has a dealer or dealers ever complained to Mitsubishi about unreasonable targets that you've set? Some dealers have been told around 800 to 900 vehicles per year to be sold. Has that been ever a point of conflict between Mitsubishi Australia and your dealer network?
Senator, targets are often one of the most discussed areas between a manufacturer and our dealers. We take our target setting very seriously. We have a very sound methodology. We study intently the dealer's area that they operate in, the mix of cars that are sold in that area to come up with a target. But that doesn't mean that dealers are always happy with those targets. And we work with those dealers in terms of how they achieve those targets and where they need to focus.
We heard from Toyota that they have a very sophisticated set of KPIs, that their relationships are built on win-win-win, I think they described it, for the distributor, the dealer and the customer, and that they've moved to a model that's more sophisticated than sales, units sold. Does Mitsubishi acknowledge that setting high vehicle sales targets places very significant pressure on car dealers to meet bonuses, which then the car dealers can use to help deliver savings through the consumer?
Senator, we believe we set realistic targets for our dealer network.
Is it fair to say that your dealer network disputes those?
Certainly on occasions we have dealers that question their targets.
And when it comes
I think
to...
that's not... Sorry, Senator.
Go on.
I don't think that's uncommon across the industry.
And how do you resolve those points of conflict, Mr. Hall? What mechanisms do the dealers have to resolve those if they feel that's unfair?
The dealer network has many channels with which they can communicate to Mitsubishi Motors Australia. They have close relationships with the regions through their regional managers, the general managers of the regions, Mitsubishi senior management. They also have the NDC, the National Dealer Council, which represents the broader interests of the dealer network. And the NDC is made up of a number of members that represent different regions and different types of dealer operations. So they include rural dealers, provincial dealers and metro dealers. So a dealer has an opportunity to have a member that can represent their business in the fact that that member is familiar with the type of operation they would be running.
Have any matters...
Senator, we also have a dispute resolution in our franchise agreement. That resolution process has never been used by either party.
Right. Okay, there might be a number of reasons for that. It's a good historical moment, but sometimes these things are not accessed because they're ineffective or people feel that they could suffer retribution if they activated a dispute process. So I might just leave it at that. Can I go to the NDC as the site at which these matters are mediated? How many times has Mitsubishi been before the NDC in the last couple of years to resolve these matters?
We have regular meetings with the NDC and we engage regularly on, as I mentioned in my opening statement, regarding areas of opportunities and areas of concern.
So with regard to dispute resolution for them, how many times have you had to go to the NDC because your dealers have said they're not getting a fair deal from you?
Not that many times, Senator.
Can you take on notice how many times you've gone to the NDC and give me an indication of how those matters were resolved and whether the targets that were set per vehicle went up or down? And I don't want to indicate that you're the only car distributor for an OEM that has these challenges, but I am trying to get a sense of how power is operating in this sector. And I want to make sure there's sufficient power for those dealers to ensure that they can get a good deal for their customers, because they're my fellow citizens. I'm very focused on them. I've personally heard reported that Mitsubishi in recent years has been setting unreasonable targets and pressured smaller dealers to engage in a practice called pre-reporting vehicles under cyber sales or fake cars, I think is the terminology. Mr. Hoare, are you familiar with pre-reporting vehicle sales, also called a cyber car or a fake sale? What is that?
You can only report a car once, but pre-reporting is where a car is reported prior to it going to the end user.
So you report it as sold, but it isn't actually sold. Is that correct?
It's sold to the dealer, not to the end user.
Okay, but the goal surely is the car is not sold until it's actually sold to the person who drives it generally around in the community. When I buy a car, I'm the buyer of that car and the car is sold to me. What is this pre-selling cyber car fake sales incentive? Why is Mitsubishi making Mitsubishi dealers purchase a car into their own business rather than waiting for them to sell it? What is the incentive there for Mitsubishi to do that?
Senator, I think the incentive is for the dealer to do that, to pick up bonuses or incentives that they can then pass on to the consumer.
So the business is structured that you sell the car to Mitsubishi dealers and you give them a bonus when they buy a car from you rather than when a customer or a member of the public buys a car from them.
There are a range of incentives, Senator. Some are directly to the customer, some are to the dealer network. Ultimately, that comes out to the customer. You may be aware, Senator, that the VFACTS process of reporting cars changed at the start of January 2020.
Did it change because of this practice, Mr. Hall? Because it was so deceptive and there was no clear line of sight about the proper number of cars being sold?
I think there was clear line of sight, but it certainly did change at the beginning of January 2020.
What was the reason for that, Mr. Hall?
To ensure, I think, that a timely measurement of cars in and out were provided.
So, in fact, the practice was so widespread that it was actually distorting the accurate reporting of how cars were being sold in Australia, and a range of incentives were built in to create that distortion that disadvantaged the motor dealers. So they were holding stock that they'd paid Mitsubishi for that they hadn't actually sold.
That they had additional money on. It is the role of the distributor. We wholesale cars, dealers do the retailing.
Yes. I understand that, but the practice has been changed because it wasn't a healthy practice, and the impact on businesses is well documented on the public record in this inquiry, and indeed in the inquiry into franchising in Australia from another committee. Can you confirm for the public record in the last 5 years what would have been the largest number of cars pre-reported at any one time?
I'll take that question on notice, Senator.
So over the last 5 years, if you could give me an indication of the volume of pre-reporting and give it to me in the context of the actual sales, so I can get a good sense of what was going on, the scale of pre-reporting. Thank you. Can Mitsubishi, for the record, agree that these vehicles were never sold to a retail customer but were reported as sold or demos to improve Mitsubishi's market share in Australia? Or the reporting of the market share?
No, I cannot confirm that. That was...
Do you deny that it had that impact? That if you sold a certain number of cars on the books, even if the cars hadn't actually been sold to real people, that it enabled you to report a higher volume of market share? Is that accurate? Did it allow you to do that, Mr. Hall?
No, Senator, it doesn't, because as mentioned earlier, you can only report the car once.
But you could
So when that car
time
is
the
sold
car
to the end
in.
user,
Go on.
so when the car is sold to the end user, if it was a pre-reported vehicle, it doesn't count again. So you're not getting an advantage in market share.
But at a point of time, you would be.
Not necessarily, Senator. It depends what you've put on and what you've on-sold.
When you give me your on
It's a
notice,
timing issue.
yeah, it is a timing issue. When you give me your on notice report, could you give me the months across the year so I can see what happens in terms of the movement there? Has Mitsubishi ever encouraged dealers to pre-report vehicles or report fake sales to boost the sense of market share in the country?
No, Senator.
All right. If I can go to the evidence that we received on Thursday, are you familiar with the evidence that came from the US car dealers, Peak Body? It said that they have protections in place to protect vulnerable dealers in the number 2 car market, selling market in the world. Did you hear their evidence or see any of it at all, Mr. Hall?
I saw some of it, not all of it, Senator.
Okay. And you're aware that they gave evidence that in 50 states across the US, because of the power imbalance between the car dealer networks and the OEMs, such as Mitsubishi, 50 states legislated to provide protection to the industry. Do you have a view about the need for protection for car dealers in the industry here in Australia, Mr. Hall? Is it like the US after we saw what happened to Holden?
The Holden example is highly unusual. We wouldn't be successful today without our effective working relationship with our dealers. We believe the code provides foundation of the relationship and gives us a shared understanding, and we think it works effectively with different size and dynamics of our respective business partners. It's a relationship that requires dependence on one another and coexistence. As a manufacturer, we bring certain things to play in terms of product, specialised training, marketing, resources, process, and these are sometimes what smaller organisations or dealers couldn't access or develop or provide themselves. And the dealer is extremely important because they provide the local expertise, the local community knowledge, and the ability to look after our customers effectively and efficiently. But as we've spoken, that doesn't mean it's always beer and skittles. There are occasions where we don't see eye to eye in terms of how is best to run the brand in Australia.
So, of course, in business, there's always contest of ideas, and sometimes people will just do things to stay in business because they've got money invested and they need to continue, even if they're not happy with the arrangement that they have with their supplier. So that's why there's a thing called the manufacturing code. But do you acknowledge that the car dealership manufacturing relationship is not a standard franchising model, that it's got particular characteristics that made it different from other franchises?
To a degree, Senator, yes, I do. Obviously, for a starter, within terms of our franchise agreement, there is no requirement for the dealers to pay for having the Mitsubishi franchise. And the size and dynamics of the franchise network in Australia is significant. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, it goes from small rural dealers in outback Australia to large Australian organisations that are larger than Mitsubishi itself. So the dynamics of the Australian model, I think, is very, very different from what the franchising model was originally designed to provide for.
I have to agree with you, Mr. Hoare. I think things have changed quite rapidly and there needs to be some significant change. Would you support a standalone dealership code specific to this industry?
We would certainly be willing to participate in looking at it, but we would require considerable detail to be able to make a decision around that.
Mr. Hoare, do you see the dealers as essential stakeholders in your business?
Absolutely, Senator.
And are you aware that they're represented by the AADA, who have petitioned very, very vigorously for greater protections for the industry and support mandatory principles for new car dealership agreements and mandatory arbitration when all things fall apart? Are you willing to support your dealers?
Senator, we feel that our current franchise code provides that opportunity. We have act in good faith within the code. We have unconscionable conduct within the Australian consumer law. We believe that there are protections in place, and there have also been recent changes to further strengthen the code that have been implemented.
I think it's fair to say that the OEMs have come today supporting the recent changes, but all of the evidence from the dealers was no support for the changes. They see them as window dressing, I think, well, not to verbal them, but that's not meeting their needs, that they need greater protection. They actually need mandatory codes, mandatory principles and mandatory arbitration if all goes, all goes belly up, so to speak. Would you leave Australia, as I said at the beginning, if any of these things became mandatory, Mr. Hall?
Based on the fact that Australia is such a critical market to Mitsubishi, we have no intention of leaving the Australian market.
I'm very
We
heartened by
want
that.
to grow our presence and our sales performance and want more customers driving Mitsubishis. That is our aim in the Australian market.
So making these relationships of integrity mandatory rather than voluntary would just be a small step up for you at Mitsubishi, is that correct?
Senator, based on our ability to see the detail around it, is what we would require to be able to respond to that question.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask a couple of closing ones? There's a dealer that recently closed in Dubbo, Mr. Hoare. As the Director of Sales, I'm sure you're aware of that place.
Yes, Senator, I heard you reference it last Thursday.
Okay. And with regard to that business, what was it called and how many people did it employ?
Sorry, Senator, it wasn't a Mitsubishi dealership.
Do you know how many people it employed?
No, I don't, Senator.
Could it be roughly in the region of 30?
Senator, it could be. I don't wish to seem vague, but I don't believe it was one of our dealers.
So you have not had a dealer close in Dubbo?
No, we have representation in Dubbo.
And the protections that were in place for purchasers of vehicles there, could they still service their vehicles in the local area?
I would gather that they would be able to, Senator. I'm not sure what brand it was, but we've had long-time representation within Dubbo and still do.
Does it trouble you at all, Mr. Hoare, that following Holden's departure, there's been reports of delays in warranty response? Is that the kind of thing that would be likely if, say, a big company like Mitsubishi were to dissolve its network and move to an agency model?
Senator, we have no intention of leaving Australia, and we're actually not interested in the agency model. We don't think that's a model that would best suit our business. We're actually, as I mentioned, growing our dealer network, increasing the size of it, and we firmly believe that our dealers are critical to our success. And the best performance we're going to get are from highly motivated entrepreneurial dealerships that are maximising every available sales opportunity. And we believe that is best given to us by the current model that we're operating.
Thank you, Mr. Hoare. The dealers who are in contact with us through the dealers' networks, through the AADA, and also dealers who are in contact with this committee in confidence because they're concerned about the power imbalance and the risk to their business from the power that resides with you, with Mitsubishi, are seeking protection. They want the government to provide them with mandatory principles for new car dealership agreements. They are seeking mandatory resolution through arbitration if necessary. Why does Mitsubishi see the car dealers receiving the protections that they seek from the government as being a cost rather than ensuring a successful partnership?
Senator, as stated previously, we need to see the detail to understand the impact of the guiding principles, but changes to the code frequently do cause cost and resource usage, both for manufacturers and the dealer network. As mentioned, there have been some changes that have been incorporated into the franchise agreement, and we believe it's prudent to actually let those changes be viewed to see what impact they make. Continual change to the code is difficult. The code has almost been changed every 3 years, which is considerably shorter than our typical dealer agreement term.
I guess if it was working properly, we wouldn't need to change it. But there's been a lot of requests over time. Thank you very much for your evidence, Mr. Hoare. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senators.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, for your evidence today on behalf of Mitsubishi Australia.